the hour, and we are coming on the air with an abortion showdown just wrapping up in federal court with sharp questions from the judges about a widely used pill. Taking it off the market could cut off access to abortion care for millions, as 2 southern states are putting up new barriers. Where is access headed? We're asking that question. Also, a car chase controversy. Prince Harry and Meghan say they got into a, quote, near catastrophic wreck. The police say not so fast. The eerie parallels to the death of Harry's mother, Diana. Plus, in this breakdown, we're looking at eggs going the way of Humpty Dumpty, having a great fall in prices, their lowest levels in nearly 2 years. Is it a sign of broader cost cuts at the grocery store for you and for me? And never before seen images of the Titanic. You got to see this. The first full-size scan of the sunken ship, giving us new insight into how it may have gone under. And then Netflix is courting advertisers for the first time ever, and we are learning more about new struggles for its lower-cost subscription. Those details later in the show. Good day, I'm Tom Costello, in for Hallie, and we begin with the newest battle over abortion access in this country. Mifepristone, the most commonly used abortion pill, is at the center of a court case that will likely land at the Supreme Court and could remove this pill from U.S. markets completely. A panel of 3 conservative appeals court judges in Louisiana heard oral arguments in the closely watched case that wrapped up in just the last hour. The judges hit the lawyer trying to keep access open with some tough questions and skepticism about the FDA's decades-long approval of the pill. Take a listen.
I think FDA is charged with determining what is relevant for safety and efficacy, and it's certainly not up to lawyers and judges to come in and say, well,
if the FDA didn't consider an important part of the problem, it is our role, correct, to go behind the FDA and determine whether what they did was arbitrary and capricious.
All right. Well, remember, we've been talking a lot about the future of access to this abortion pill recently. And then the Supreme Court just last month temporarily blocked that lower court ruling that would have tightened up the restrictions. Now, the pill has been approved since the year 2000, to provide abortions and manage miscarriages. And now it's all but certain whether these judges, what they decide and when they would decide it, whether it will now go all the way up to the Supreme Court. All of this as lawmakers in South Carolina look at that they're about to pass a 6-week ban on most abortions. 6 weeks, the latest state to scale back abortion access across the country. NBC Shaq Brewster is monitoring all of this in South Carolina, but we now begin with our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett. Laura, this appeals court is stacked with conservative Donald Trump appointees. Walk us through what we're hearing from some of them today, and where could this case go?
Yeah, 2 of those appointees from the former president hearing this case today, another one appointed by George W. Bush. We don't know exactly how they will rule, when they will rule. They don't have a deadline. But if I were a lawyer for the Biden administration tonight, I would be advising the president that they appear unlikely to allow this to go forward. They appeared, I think, deeply skeptical. Skeptical will probably be putting it mildly, Tom. They really took DOJ and the pill manufacturer to task, especially on this issue of whether the groups that sued to begin with, the anti-abortion groups and doctors, whether those doctors have standing. The Biden administration has maintained all along that they don't have standing. Remember, these are doctors that don't want to actually prescribe this drug. They're morally opposed to the drug. And this court has said, this 3-judge panel essentially saying that they do have standing, at least through their questioning, suggesting that they do, which would be a big step. But of course, remember, all of this may not really matter that much in the short term because the Supreme Court's going to hear this case either way you cut it.
And what they decide there could have a national implication, right? So make it clear for us now, what will this mean for people trying to have access to this abortion pill, not just in South Carolina, but nationwide?
Right. So remember, this all dates back to this judge's order from last month, this federal judge in Texas that invalidated the FDA's approval nationwide, which would rip the pill off the market for everybody nationwide. That's what the Biden administration is fighting. That's what's up on appeal in the Fifth Circuit. So if the Fifth Circuit decides that that judge was right, then the Biden administration will go back up to the Supreme Court to try to get that stopped, to try to get that blocked. No telling exactly, of course, how the Supreme Court would rule on this. Just because they just agreed to put in that temporary pause to maintain access to the pill doesn't mean that they would do so on the merits. That was just in sort of an emergency order type situation. So it's unclear how they would actually treat this. But it would have enormous implications, given that this is the #1 way that people terminate their pregnancies nowadays, Tom.
I said South Carolina. I meant Louisiana. But, Laura, thank you very much. Laura Jarrett.
Sure.
All right, now let's bring in NBC Shaq Brewster. And, Shaq, lawmakers in South Carolina look like they're getting closer to passing a bill that would ban most abortions at 6 weeks. So walk us through what this would do and what could it mean for access to abortion in South Carolina and broadly across the South.
Well, Tom, you could be looking at potentially dramatic changes. South Carolina now debating a bill that would put it further and take it further than even what we saw here in North Carolina just yesterday. Is South Carolina debating a 6-week abortion ban? There are some exceptions in that law that would allow for rape. If there is a case of rape and incest, that would push that limit to about 12 weeks. But this would represent a dramatic shift. And, you know, normally we talk about debates between Democrats and Republicans, and that definitely exists in South Carolina. But really what the holdup is and has been in that state is a debate within Republicans. House Republicans have been calling for a near total ban, but the state Senate is saying all they can get right now is that 6-week ban. Meanwhile, you have Democrats in the state just saying all of this is politics and it's about controlling women. Listen to what we heard from a Democratic lawmaker.
They have left them to die. I say it's time out with playing with the lives of South Carolinians and especially women in this state.
What you're seeing right now in South Carolina is Democrats, they've flooded the procedures with amendments, hundreds and hundreds of amendments that have to be voted on by the entire chamber. This is the second special session that they've had to consider this legislation after previous legislation was struck down by the state Supreme Court. So a lot of movement back and forth. But bottom line, it looks like South Carolina is on the verge of passing that 6-week abortion ban. Tom.
All of this coming after the Supreme Court overturned Roe versus Wade, leaving it up to the states to decide. Shaq, thanks very much. Shaq Brewster. All right, we are now getting some mixed messages about whether an incident involving the paparazzi and Prince Harry and Meghan really was or wasn't serious. A spokesperson for the couple says that they were in a, quote, near catastrophic car chase in New York City, while law enforcement sources tell us it wasn't really a chase necessarily. It happened after an awards ceremony in Manhattan. You're seeing pictures from inside the Women of Vision Awards that Meghan and Harry attended last night, and you see them right before this all went down. 2 senior law enforcement sources tell us Harry and Meghan left the Ziegfeld Ballroom where the event was being held at about 9:50 to 10 p.m. And then you see the couple leaving the event. Police say what happened next was, quote, a chaotic scene. A lot of paparazzi around the Duke and the Duchess of Sussex apparently trying to follow them. And if the chaos sounds familiar, it is, because there are some parallels to how Harry's mom, Diana, Princess Diana, died. A high-speed car chase in Paris, and then she was being followed, of course, by the high-speed paparazzi. No comment from Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, about this matter today, but NBC's Ron Allen is following it from New York City, and Keir Simmons is outside of Buckingham Palace. We start with Ron. Ron, police have a preliminary timeline of how this all went down. What else do they know about what happened?
Well, they describe it again as a challenging situation, not potentially catastrophic. But Harry and Meghan released a statement that clearly shows that they were very, very upset by what happened. And given what happened to his mother, and given the fact that he moved his family from the UK in part to escape the British tabloids and British paparazzi, you can perhaps understand why this is a very, very sensitive thing for them. As we understand it, after they left the Ziegfeld Theater behind me, they went down some city streets, 57th Street it is, heading towards the west side, the FDR, about a half mile in that direction to get to a highway. Then this whole process where they are either followed or chased, depending upon which interpretation you want to believe, lasts about an hour and 15 minutes to 2 hours or so. They end up at a police precinct where the police facilitate them getting into a taxi. The taxi pulls off for a little while, 15, 20 minutes, gets blocked by a garbage truck, if you can believe that. They go back to the precinct and get into another vehicle and go back home. During this whole time, it appears that they're in a car with a security guard, and there's a NYPD police car that's leading them through the city. Again, the police say that this was challenging, that there were no collisions, no summonses, no injuries, no arrests, and the suspects say it was near catastrophic. Highly aggressive paparazzi, relentless pursuit, multiple near collisions. And again, you can understand why they would say things like that, given just the history here. And there are very eerie parallels to what happened in Paris.
Yeah, I was living in London at the time, and actually Princess Diana's cortege, her funeral procession, went past my house back then. So it rings very seriously to me. And I'm just wondering, there are parallels, as you discussed, between what happened today, or this week, I should say, and also what happened back in 1997, right? But three senior law enforcement sources are kind of downplaying it ever so slightly here in the States.
Yeah, I was there, too. I remember seeing you there. And I spent 3 months in Paris covering this after it happened, after the Diana crash. And to be clear, this was not that. But again, we're in a major city where there was some sort of a chase or being followed. We have heard, interestingly, from the taxi driver who they encountered along the way at some point. Here's how he described what happened when they got in his car and they had to stop somewhere. Take a listen.
People just came out of nowhere with cameras and started snapping pictures. It was just like a strobe light show. I don't know what happened previous in the day, right? With me, it was chaotic, but not crazy.
So again, yeah, we don't know exactly what the whole process was through the entire evening as they were on the move through the city. And again, this lasted anywhere from an hour to perhaps a longer period of time. But they got to where they were going. I believe it's a private residence somewhere in the city, safe and sound. About a mile or two from here is their ultimate destination. But again, the suspects released this statement because they were angry, because they were scared, perhaps, because they were upset. The taxi driver said that they appeared nervous when they got in the car. So how can you have to look at it in both ways. And but again, the NYPD are playing down any suggestion that this was a potentially catastrophic situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Ron, thank you very much. Ron Allen in New York. Let's bring in Keir Simmons from London. And Keir, it certainly seems as if what happened to his mom was scarring to him. It has left him deeply traumatized. And now we've had, a similar pursuit, if you will, according to them, in New York City. This has got to be of concern to the royals, even though perhaps, it is strained, the relationship's strained right now.
Of course, the relationship is strained. I can imagine that the king, who's in Buckingham Palace right now, will be concerned. It's a mark, isn't it, of the age we live in, that it's descending quite quickly into kind of polarized opinions about what exactly happened. I think Ron had it exactly right. Where they followed, where they chased, you end up with trying to negotiate through those linguistics, if you like. I think to make some points about the comparison with Princess Diana, his mom. Princess Diana was trying to escape the paparazzi. She tried to evade the unwanted cameras most of her adult life when she crashed in Paris, and it looks like Prince Harry, Meghan and her mum were trying to escape the paparazzi. So there's a kind of parallel there. And another point, I think, Princess Diana had lost her security, her royal security, if you like, and she was being guarded by freelance private bodyguards. And again, it looks like the Sussexes are being guarded by their own private security. And I think one of the questions here will be, how on earth did they end up getting into a taxi? I mean, that just sounds, chaotic is the right word to describe the kind of protection that they appear to have been received. And I mean, in the end, it is the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. You can understand why they and her mum, his mother-in-law might be frightened in that situation. That being said, Tom, as well, the other part of this is that Prince Harry has been waging this war with the British tabloid press in particular and against the paparazzi, and that's another piece of the puzzle, another piece of why they would issue a statement like this, I think.
Keir, I know that you have met Prince Harry before, you've interviewed him before, and I'm just wondering, do you think that this event might cause he and his wife to retreat further from public view?
I don't think they're going to retreat further from public view, but I do think what it tells us is that this battle, this crusade almost that Prince Harry believes he's on, he isn't stopping. I mean, there's an interesting quote at the beginning of his book, his autobiography, that goes along somewhere along the lines of, the past isn't the past. Well, clearly for Prince Harry, the past is definitely not the past. He's still living that same battle, if you like. And you have to wonder, just for him, for them, how long does this continue? Because there are those who would argue that fighting with the media just gets you nowhere. I mean, it's just endless. There are parts of the media that might almost enjoy it. I would make another point, and I think it's an important one too, though, is that here in the UK, the royals have put out statements about paparazzi in the past. What they're trying to do when they do that is to prevent the pictures from being sold, because they believe that if they can interrupt that kind of economic advantage, that will actually slow the paparazzi down and perhaps stop them from doing what they're doing. And perhaps the Sussexes were trying to do that here, but with this language, the question is whether they're going to just end up being criticised for not depicting what happened in an accurate way.
All right. Thank you very much. Keir Simmons, who remains in London on the story for us. Now to Idaho, where a grand jury has indicted the man accused of fatally stabbing 4 University of Idaho students last year. Brian Kohberger is expected to be arraigned on murder charges and enter a plea during a court appearance on Monday. The 28-year-old criminology student is accused of stabbing and killing the students last November at their house near campus. Kohberger was arrested at his family's home in Pennsylvania last December, suspected of 4 counts of first-degree murder and burglary. The grand jury's indictment lets the state avoid a preliminary hearing. Neither prosecutors nor Kohberger's public defender could be immediately released for comment. NBC's Steve Patterson on the story for us. Steve, how does a grand jury indictment impact proceedings, and what's the legal strategy here on the part of the DA?
Well, the impact all has to center around the fact that, as you mentioned, there is no preliminary hearing. It is more involved than people think it is. You're talking about a week-long, essentially, trial before the trial, where evidence is presented, where testimony is exhibited in court, where there's cross-examination to that testimony. None of that is going to happen in a courtroom setting. So you have now a prosecution that is just dealing with that grand jury and a judge. So if you're talking about strategic considerations, they don't have to show their hand. They're not, none of the witnesses that they would call to that situation are going to be exposed to the defense. So the defense won't know how, for instance, maybe one of those witnesses would fold or not under pressure of cross-examination. That, of course, could be part of the strategic calculus. Another thing is, for these witnesses that would be called, we know that some of them were inside that house. They are survivors of this incident. They are people that live there. They don't have to relive this on the stand in front of a public setting. That is sort of one consideration. Another might be the fact that, now there's going to be no media around that attention, no media circus, no weeks of speculation, possibly contaminating or affecting the outcome of the case. All of that part of this now, that it is now essentially a private consideration. The next thing that will happen is on Monday, Kohberger expected in for an arraignment where he will enter a plea in this case. Tom?
Steve, neither the police nor the DA have described a motive in these killings. Do we have any idea of what the evidence is? Some of it we became aware of with the arrest, but do we have any more idea of what the evidence is here?
No more, other than, obviously what was said at the time, the knife sheath that was found in the home containing DNA matched to familial DNA at Kohberger's home, matched to his father. There's also the cell phone records. There were pings before and after in the area. And, of course, relating to what we were talking about, the witness testimony that is expected. Those witnesses say they saw a silhouette of a person inside the home, maybe matching the build of Kohberger. All that part of this. But as you also said, we haven't been in touch with the prosecution or defense, so we don't know what more exactly they have, Tom.
Yeah, and the DA had said at the time of the arrest that they would really keep a lid on it. So maybe we wait for the trial. Steve, thanks very much. Steve Patterson. So in the next couple of hours, President Biden will be landing in Anchorage, the first leg of a 5-day journey to Asia, cut short by the high-stakes talks to try to avert a global economic disaster. Here's what's on the schedule for the president at the G7. He'll meet with the Japanese prime minister tomorrow in Hiroshima. Friday, he and the other G7 leaders will visit the Hiroshima Memorial Museum, the site of the nuclear bombing during World War II. Saturday, he will talk about infrastructure. And we will hear from him Sunday in a press conference before he heads back to D.C. And that's where he will put his focus back on the debt ceiling. Before leaving today, the president sounded hopeful about the talks.
I'm confident that we'll get the agreement on the budget, that America will not default. We're going to come together because there's no alternative to do the right thing for the country.
NBC's Mike Memoli joins me now from Hiroshima, Japan, ahead of the president. Mike's been up all night. It's now daylight tomorrow in Japan. Mike, it's a thin tightrope that the president is walking here. He wants to stay close to allies, but his mind will clearly be on these high-stakes talks back here in D.C. Where do the talks stand at this hour between House Republicans and the president?
Well, happy Thursday morning here from Hiroshima, Tom. And the president clearly, before beginning that very long journey here to Japan, thought it was important to lay down a bit of a marker back home in Washington to set an optimistic tone for where he thinks talks are at the moment. And it was clear that the second meeting between Biden and that group of 4 legislators, the top Democrats and Republicans from the House and Senate, yesterday in the Oval Office went far better than the first meeting. And the president really underscored one reason why, which is the team of negotiators that have now been empowered by the 2 key players, himself and Speaker McCarthy, to really get into the weeds and the thorny negotiations over the next few days. That includes Congressman Garrett Graves on the Republican side, who's been quietly an important ally for Speaker McCarthy with that rambunctious Republican conference. And then on the Biden side, we have Louisa Terrell. She's the Director of Legislative Affairs. Of course, she's going to be involved in these talks. Steve Ricchetti, a top Biden lieutenant, member of his inner circle for more than a decade. The key player to watch really here is the director of the Office of Management and Budget, Shalonda Young. She's been in that role for 2 years. It's what she did before that that is really driving, I think, some of the optimism here. She was in the trenches as a staffer on the Appropriations Committee in the House for more than a decade. And so she has built relationships with Republican staffers in a way that I think is going to bear real fruit potentially here to the extent that these negotiations are successful. And now the president, the other job he's going to have, of course, Tom, when he is here, he'll be getting briefed regularly on where those talks are back home, but he's going to have to reassure our allies. The G7 is, of course, the world's biggest economies. And as the president has warned about the economic fallout of a default in the U.S., we know that the ripple effects globally will also be significant. That's why Jake Sullivan said the president's, yes, going to be reassuring our allies that we will avoid default, but that he's leaving, cutting this trip short so that he can go home and make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, to put a fine point on it, the dollar is the global currency and the G7 is the big gathering. All right, let's talk a little bit more about the G7 summit. Ukraine likely to be a big focus. Talking war in a city like Hiroshima, whose very name evokes war, that'll be, I would think, poignant. But also China, both in its economic expansion and also the threats to Taiwan. And the president also floating this idea that he may try to talk to China's leader sometime soon as well, right?
Yeah, that's right, Tom. I mean, you're right that Ukraine is going to be the early focus here. The G7, obviously an economically focused alliance, but the president very proud of the fact that it's not just Europe that's stepping up to the plate. The host, Japan, has been a key part of it as well. The larger trip, though, is really meant to send a signal of strength on the part of Biden and other democracies, our allies here in Asia, in China's backyard. That's why cutting the trip short was seen as potentially a win for China, evidence of what President Xi Jinping has told President Biden, which he doesn't think democracies can function. Our colleague Monica Alba asked the president about that earlier today, and let's take a listen to his response.
Do you plan to speak with President Xi soon, sir?
That's my whether it's soon or not. We will be.
And has it upstairs.
So it is possible that we will hear of a meeting between President Biden and President Xi. White House officials are downplaying that at the moment. We've seen a ramp up of diplomatic engagements between top-level U.S. and Chinese officials of late, Tom.
Mike Memoli, time for a fish breakfast there in Japan. Thanks very much, Mike. Traveling with the president. The ongoing culture war on book bans in Florida is at the center of a new lawsuit against a school district in that state. Penguin, Random House, authors, Florida parents, and an advocacy group are all getting in on this suit after the Escambia County School District and its school board banned 10 books related to race and the LGBTQ community. Now, the first lawsuit argues that removing books on these topics is part of a, quote, clear agenda. Since late May, the district and the board have removed or indefinitely restricted access to 5 books by the author plaintiffs, the ones you see here on your screen. They include Uncle Bobby's Wedding, Two Boys Kissing, and other books. NBC's Antonia Hilton joins me now. Antonia, the lawsuit cites the First and the 14th Amendments here, right? So talk us through that.
That's right, Tom. This lawsuit was filed this morning, and this coalition of parents in the district, of authors, of free speech advocates, and a publisher, they're arguing that the removal of these books poses a threat to people's First Amendment rights and to the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. And that's because they're pointing out that the disproportionate number of the books focus on LGBTQ people and racial minorities. And what they want to see happen is this school district and other school districts in the state of Florida that have been engaged in similar practices bring these books back into the fold. The parents involved in this lawsuit, for example, they've argued that their kids have the right to have access to unique stories, to perspectives, to types of families that look different than theirs. Take a listen to a conversation that one of the authors of one of the most banned books in the country had on MSNBC earlier today.
When you have a book that is telling a first-hand account of what it is like to grow up in this country being Black and queer and giving representation to a community that rarely gets to see themselves seen in books, seen on television, it creates an empowerment for those students.
Many of the parents and administrators that have pushed to remove books in this district and elsewhere have labeled some of these themes inappropriate. Pornographic is a word that comes up often. I reached out to the school district to see what their response was to this lawsuit. They said they couldn't comment in an official capacity, but I did talk to one of the school board members who told me that he was surprised not by the contents of this lawsuit, Tom, but by the fact that their district was chosen because this is happening in so many parts of Florida right now. And he said that their impression is that they are following what the state, what current leadership under DeSantis wants schools to do.
You know, I'm just curious here, and I don't mean to blindside you if you don't know the answer here, but so they're taking this action in the school district. Are they also taking this action in the community libraries? And how does this fit into the broader political landscape in Florida and across the country?
Well, you're absolutely right that there is a broader context here. So there are the public school districts and the fights there. Usually there are review processes that have long been in place where parents could always come forward. They could raise concerns about a book. They could have their child opt out of a certain lesson in class. And if district leaders had questions, they could go through it in a committee. But we're seeing this now happen in higher education, too. In fact, on Monday, Governor DeSantis signed a bill that is going to keep public universities and colleges from being able to have diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. So you're right that there's a longer lens here, and this is all part of a culture war that is certainly, spreading in Florida, but is elsewhere too.
Well, Florida is right in the middle of it. Antonia, thank you very much for your reporting. Confirmation today that another American has died fighting in Ukraine. It comes from the family of 45-year-old Army veteran Nicholas Mamer. After this video was posted on Telegram showing the chief of Russia's mercenary group, the Wagner Group, standing over what he says is a dead American soldier in Bakhmut, where fighting has intensified. Mamer's uncle confirmed to the Idaho Statesman that the body is, in fact, that of his nephews. The State Department says it is aware of the reports, but has not been able to confirm Mamer's death independently. Our NBC affiliate in Boise, KIVI, reports that Mamer retired from the Army back in 2018 and then went to Ukraine last spring to begin training civilian volunteers stationed alongside Ukraine's border. Mamer's death marks at least the 10th American killed since the Russian invasion started last year. Joining me now from Kyiv, NBC's Molly Hunter. Molly, what more do we know about this American veteran who was killed on the battlefield in Ukraine?
And Tom, your intro right there really kind of demonstrated to our audience how complicated it is to confirm when we see and when we get reports like this or when we see videos like that from the Wagner chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin. I do just want to add that NBC News spoke with Sherry Mamery, which is Nicholas's aunt, who also confirmed his death to us. What's interesting, though, he was one of thousands of Americans and foreign fighters who came over, Tom, at the beginning of the war to join the fight. And, of course, he was a Green Beret. He was a 20-year U.S. veteran. And he said he felt like his skills could really be of use. Now, just a couple of months ago, a couple of months before his death, our colleague Raf Sanchez was actually covering the training of volunteer Ukrainian soldiers who were civilians training up to be soldiers. And he actually met Nicholas. Take a listen to what he had to say.
In kind of recent history, this is one of the most clear-cut violations of human rights and national sovereignty that we've seen. With my background, I knew I was compelled to come help.
Tom, Raf had asked him how he arrived in Ukraine, why he showed up, and you just heard that answer. He also asked him, had you been east yet? This was just in February. He said, I haven't been east yet, but I was prepared to go. And as we learn details about the circumstances of his death, it does sound and it does appear, if those videos that we saw from the Wagner Group were accurate, that he did die in the very fierce fighting in Bakhmut, which is in the east, Tom.
Absolutely. That's been in the headlines for months now in eastern Ukraine, and we've been watching that city really just get absolutely pummeled. But we've also seen these aerial attacks. They came yesterday, and the strategy seemed to be to try to take out, as I understand it, some of the Patriot missile batteries defending Kyiv. Now, the Russians claim that they took out a Patriot missile battery. The Ukrainians have denied it. What is your best sense on the ground? Were those defense systems taken out?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, these are a key and very strategic, very important part of Ukraine's air defenses. Tom, we talked to the Ukrainian air defense yesterday, touted their success, really saying that they shot down every single missile, that there wasn't any damage. Well, that does not appear to be the case. So you did just say the Russian claim that they have taken out not only radars, but also launchers of the U.S.-made Patriot air defense systems. Well, tonight, 2 U.S. officials tell NBC News that a Patriot system incurred damage on Tuesday, but is still operational. And when we pressed Ukrainian officials today about that, their top line, Tom, was that they're still operational. There is nothing to look at, nothing to worry about here.
All right. Good information there. Molly Hunter in Kyiv. Thank you very much. Coming up from us, a dire warning from scientists, a grim climate change milestone that they say we are rapidly approaching. And new tech means you'll no longer have to choose between your favorite condiments. How you can have it all. All of it. Coming up later in 5 Things. Okay, we're back. Does the news get you down? Well, a new study finds good news might make negative stuff feel better. We all need that, right? It's coming up in the 5 Things. But first from us, some bad news. Today, the World Meteorological Organization is sounding the alarm with a new report, and it says the Earth is likely to break a key global warming threshold for the first time ever. The organization says at least once between this year and 2027, there is a 66% chance that yearly temps will climb higher than 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Also, between now and 2027, a 98% chance that we will see the warmest year ever recorded. The WMO says this is not only bad news for the environment, but also for our health, our food, our security, and other issues like water management. We want to bring in meteorologist Angie Lastman now for the more on this, I should say. And Angie, what other red flags does this report raise?
Yeah, the report has so many facets to it, Tom, a lot of red flags. The most important one, what you just mentioned right off the bat, was that 1.5 degree threshold, that we are more likely than not, for the first time ever, to reach that 1.5 degree threshold. That doesn't mean that it is a long-term threshold, that we have reached that globally and it will be permanent. It means that temporarily we could see some years over the next 5 years where we reach that threshold. It has a multitude of effects, even if it's just for a short term. And it gives us kind of a signal that we could be seeing this more frequently and then eventually permanently, something that, of course, will have catastrophic damage across the globe. A couple of other things to note. The last 8 years have been the hottest years on record. But as you just noted, there is a very good chance, a 98% chance, that we could beat that 2016 record of the hottest temperature across the globe. And that could happen in the next 5 years. So giving us, again, more signals that if we don't change what we're doing when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions, et cetera, that we could be on this path that we no longer can stop, Tom.
Okay, alert everybody, stand by. We'll have good news in a minute, but let's focus on this for a second. First of all, El Nino is a contributing factor, right? So explain what that is and what it will mean for temperatures globally.
Yeah, so basically El Nino is a climate pattern. We look at the tropical Pacific and we see how the sea surface temperatures there change over time. And when it gets warmer there, it gets warmer globally as well. And we can see that happening here over the short term, Tom. And that means that those global temperatures, they have a big impact. And then we'll likely see that El Nino impacting us here and continuing to see those temperatures warming up for us, causing some problems. And the El Nino, of course, something that we'll have to monitor. That strong El Nino happened just after 2016 as well. So again, another signal that we could be headed that way.
It's a beautiful day outside here today in D.C. Angie, thank you very much. All right, let's get you over now to the 5 things our team thinks that you should know about tonight. Number 1, the Virginia man accused of attacking 2 staffers in Congressman Jerry Connolly's office with that metal baseball bat. He's now facing a federal assault charge. He was already facing multiple local charges. The 49-year-old man refused to show up for his arraignment yesterday. Police are still trying to understand his motive. Number 2, the share of people who are working from home tripled during the pandemic. That according to new data from the Census Bureau. In 2019, just 5.7% of all workers in the U.S. were home-based. That ballooned to 18% in 2021. As you might expect, areas like management, business, science, art, sales, they saw the biggest increase in working from home. Not firefighters, not cooks. Number 3, the San Antonio Spurs are the winner of the first overall pick in one of the most anticipated NBA draft lotteries of all time. And if you have been following basketball, you know who they're going after. 19-year-old French basketball phenom Victor Wembanyama. The 7'3" power forward being called the most exciting prospect since LeBron James. He's already putting up incredible stats in France's professional basketball league. 7'3". Number 4, a new study says that good news, here we go, good news may buffer the effects of negative stories like climate change. Researchers found that people who saw stories about things like terror attacks were then shown stories about human kindness, dogs. They felt fewer negative emotions compared to people who only saw bad news. Number 5, the latest advancement in condiment technology is here. Yes, there is such a thing. Kraft Heinz is unveiling a new Heinz Remix sauce dispenser. It's a futuristic digital machine. It can mix up any combo of 4 base sauces: ketchup, 57 sauce, ranch, barbecue, whatever you like, along with what it calls enhancers: jalapeno, smoky chipotle, buffalo, and mango. May I please add mayonnaise with that for my Belgian wife's fries? It's good. You ought to try it. Mayonnaise and fries. When we come back, scrambled, over easy, hard-boiled, however you like your eggs, buying them is finally starting to get easier on your wallet. See what we did there? Over easy? We'll tell you why when we come back. Attention, America, check your grocery bill. Have you noticed the price of eggs? It may not be the sticker shock that you were expecting. It might be relief, because right now, the price of a dozen eggs on the wholesale market is down to its lowest level in nearly 2 years. Take a look at this chart here. You're going to see wholesale prices hovering around $1 starting back in January of 22. It then shoots all the way up to more than $4.50 just 6 months ago. And then look at that, a ski slope, now just 50 cents. And that, of course, means we are paying less as well. NBC's Brian Chung is going to break it down for us.
After an eye-popping rise in egg prices earlier in the year, Humpty Dumpty is now having a great fall. The average nationwide retail price for a dozen eggs now at $3.27. That's down from an all-time peak of $4.82 back in January. Why? Supply and demand now tilting in the favor of consumers.
Part of the reason why we got to such high prices had to do with high-path avian influenza.
That's right, the deadly bird flu, now starting to get under control. Sick birds led to low supply in December, the time of year when demand for eggs is highest. In the winter, the U.S. had about 308 million hens laying eggs, 20 million less than a year before. Cal-Maine Foods, the country's largest egg producer, commanding 20% of the retail egg market, sharply raised prices. Its profits grew more than 700% in the last quarter. Those profits ruffled feathers on Capitol Hill, with Democrats like Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congresswoman Katie Porter accusing them of price gouging. Cal-Maine's response, it does not directly set retail egg prices. But the worst of the bird flu appears to be over. The hen population is growing again, moving back up to 314 million in March. So supplies back in order. All while demand wanes.
We're almost a week after Mother's Day, moving into Memorial Day, which, then comes into your grilling season.
With the holidays over and school about to break, the peak time for baking and eating breakfast at home is fading, which could all lead to deals at the grocery store.
My guess is see it another several percentage points down, maybe closer to $2.99 or $2.75 situation, depending on what kind of promotions we see throughout the retail channels.
All right, Brian Chung joins us now for more. All right, Brian, I'm going to pick up on your puns. Things got a little scrambled during the whole bird flu scare. Even Dollar Tree just stopped selling eggs because they got so expensive. And now we're seeing this relief. I know you follow this stuff. Is this a sign of other food prices that might start to come down?
Yeah, that was an excellent pun, Tom. I got to hand it to you. But look, when we talk about what's happening in eggs, we have to remember that the bird flu obviously is idiosyncratic and unique to the egg industry. It's not like lettuce or other things that also got more expensive. We're experiencing the same thing. So broadly speaking, the trend that you're seeing in eggs isn't necessarily going to be translatable to other types of food products. But look, broadly speaking, we're seeing food at home, at least in terms of as measured by the Consumer Price Index, fall between the months of March and April, as according to the most recent release. But that doesn't necessarily mean that all food's getting cheaper. Food away from home did get more expensive, so dining out does remain quite expensive. But look, I found in Brooklyn very recently $1 for a dozen eggs, so that extra money is allowing me to buy an extra chocolate bar on the way out, so it's still welcome news no matter what.
Brian, you don't even eat chocolate. I know you don't. You're so thin. Love that guy. Brian, thank you very much. Brian Chung. Coming up, folks in Michigan are calling one of their police officers there a hero. What he did to save a 4-month-old baby. We're going to have the story later in the local. And it's been over 100 years since the Titanic sank in the waters off of the North Atlantic, rather. How new technology is putting a fresh set of eyes on the wreckage. This is a super cool story. That's coming up next. All right, brand new images of the Titanic are showing us the ship's wreckage like we have never seen it before, thanks to deep sea mapping technology. Researchers now have the first full-sized digital scan of that doomed ship sitting 2.5 miles under the Atlantic Ocean. These are these remarkable images. Take a look at this. You see here the bow of the ship, the front. And as the scan swoops around, they've located where the grand staircase was, made famous in that blockbuster Hollywood movie. Researchers found the stern of the ship and the radio room. And the pictures look as if the water has just been drained away. Investigators say these images will help us all understand what really happened to that ship in 1912. Take a listen.
You can literally move around this vast wreck and find any detail that you want to. And that'll allow us eventually to understand how the wreck fell apart when it sank. Because we can literally take parts of the models and put them back together again.
NBC's Josh Letterman is joining us now from London. Josh, I thought we knew how the Titanic sank, but apparently we don't know everything, right?
That's right, Tom. And the big mystery about the Titanic has always been, how did this ship that was said to be unsinkable actually sink? And while the predominant theory for many decades has been that it hit that iceberg on the starboard side, essentially the right side of the ship, there hasn't always been a consensus about that. In fact, there was an early theory that it may have actually hit a submerged part of the iceberg on basically the bottom of the ship. And so now researchers hope this new data, this new first of its kind, a digital twin of the ship, will allow them to learn much more, not only about what happened when it hit that iceberg, but how it actually broke apart as it fell to the bottom of the ocean floor.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time looking at these images today because they're fascinating and they're important because they really help preserve the scene of this horrific tragedy that claimed 1,500 lives. But the wreckage itself is rusting away. It's not going to be there forever, right?
That's exactly right, Tom. As you know from your reporting, it sits 2.5 miles at the bottom of the ocean. It's very dark down there. And while there's not a whole lot of fish that deep down in the ocean, there is bacteria, which is eating away at the wreckage from that ship. There is all kinds of deterioration from the water around it. And so this is really a race against the clock to be able to document the remains of the ship before it further deteriorates. And that's why scientists and researchers are so excited about the opportunity to study these unprecedented images, really the first full digital copy of this ship where you can see what each little piece looked like. Those shoes on the bottom of the ocean floor, that really got to me. The remainder of some of those 1,500 victims who died in that unopened champagne bottles, part of the debris field, which will help scientists learn exactly what happened on that tragic day, Tom.
Importantly, I did ask the question, and there are no human remains, but we are looking at the remains, of course, of their bottles of champagne, as you said, shoes and brooches and jewelry. It's very poignant. Josh, thank you. Josh Letterman reporting from London for us. NBC covers hundreds of stories each day. You know, you can't possibly read, watch, listen to everything. So our bureau teams have broken it all down for us. This is what they say is happening in their regions. The segment is called The Local. From our Midwest Bureau, quick warning, this video may be disturbing to some viewers. Body cam footage capturing a Michigan police officer saving a baby's life. Police say they got a call. A 2-month-old had stopped breathing. No pulse. Sheriff's deputies performed CPR until the infant was able to breathe on his or her own. The baby is now resting and recovering thanks to them. From our Southern Bureau, bad news for anybody who's excited to see Georgia peaches in the stores this summer. Farmers across the state say a series of freezes in the peach state over the past few months have decimated the crop. Some farms are even reporting they've lost 90 to 95% of their peaches. And out of our Western Bureau, Alaska Airlines has unveiled a new design by a Native American artist. The plane features a salmon, but this time from an indigenous perspective. Look at that, kind of cool. The first for the airline. The artist says she has dreamed of having her artwork displayed on an aircraft for years. It's kind of cool, right? Still to come, Netflix with its struggling ad-supported subscription, making a big presentation today. The company plans to get things back on track. Will you pay? That's next. Well, the world's largest streaming service is getting into the fight for ad dollars in its first ever upfront presentation today. Just in the last hour, Netflix reportedly said that 25% of all new signups choose their ad-supported tier, and it's looking to expand that number. With the Wall Street Journal tweeting that co-CEO Greg Peters kicked off the show by saying, "We are new to the ads business, and that's why we want to work with you to build something bigger and better than what exists today." Netflix has the biggest subscriber base of all the streaming platforms worldwide, but it reportedly has one of the smallest pools of customers paying for their ad version compared to other big streamers. Investopedia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver joins us now. Caleb, Netflix is generally not seen as an underdog, but it got into the ad game a little late. So how much is hanging on what comes out of this presentation today?
Well, I think a lot of investors and a lot of people that watch Netflix, the company, expected a lot of this. Netflix adding about 937,000 paid subscribers to that $7, $6.99 a month plan. That was a little less than I think people had been hoping for, but it's only a couple of months old. The fact that 25% of new subscribers are choosing that option, a decent start. But Netflix has said they're new to this. They want to crawl, walk, and eventually run. But don't forget, Netflix has some 74 million subscribers here in North America alone. Yeah. So adding less than a million, not a really big number.
All right, full disclosure, NBC owns Peacock that you saw on the screen there. What about the writer's strike? How big of a deal is that now for all of these streamers?
It's a big deal. We're talking about over 11,000 writers on strike right now. Netflix had already reduced its content spend this quarter by $1 billion. So the fact that they don't have writers right now to work on these programs might be helpful in terms of saving money, but they're not going to be putting a lot of new shows out. They have some new shows coming up. Of course, Stranger Things Season 5, that might be delayed because of this strike right now. Emily in Paris, that might be delayed because of the strike right now. So it's affecting all of the content providers, all the streaming services. Netflix not alone with that, and it also wants to grow this ad-supported program, so not great timing either.
I was just going to say, the timing is terrible, right? Because so many people are cutting the cable right now. And so if they're cutting the cable, or in some cases cutting the stream, and at the meantime, there's nothing to entice them to keep them if the writers are on strike.
Yeah, and that's what all the streaming platforms are facing right now, because if they can't put out new programming, it's hard to get new subscribers to join their networks. And you also have to ask yourself, how many more people are out there that don't already have a subscription here? So it's battling with all these other companies to get these eyeballs and these paid eyeballs on this ad-supported network.
All right, so quickly now, the ad market has been soft for months now. Is Netflix where advertisers want to put their money? At least you know you got customers there.
Yeah, well, they know that, but they only have this paid rollout now for about 1 million or so, less than 1 million subscribers. So advertisers want to be able to target their users. They want to know when they're watching and how much they're watching. Very difficult in a streaming world, but Netflix does partner with Microsoft on this, and they have pretty good technology to be able to do that.
We are all news here. We don't need entertainment writers. We are facts all the time. You can watch us 24/7. Caleb, thank you very much. Caleb Silver. That is a wrap for this hour. Guess what? The coverage picks up right now. It is the top of the hour. We're coming on the air with an abortion showdown just wrapping up in federal court. Judges looking like they will strike down access to a widely used pill. Taking it off the market could cut off access to abortion care for millions, as 2 southern states are putting up new barriers where the access might be denied, where it's headed, coming up for us. Also tonight, a car chase controversy. Prince Harry and Meghan say that they got into a, quote, near catastrophic wreck. The police say not so fast. The eerie parallels to the death of Harry's mother, Diana. Plus, a new indictment for the man accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students last year. Why police still don't say what the motive might be in this case. And President Biden is going to touch down in Alaska soon as he gets ready to go abroad. His mind is really right now focused on the high-stakes economic talks. What he says about those talks and about China. Then a concerning new report on the climate today, that the world may never hit a key global warming threshold. What it tells us about the weather changes that we see every single day. That's coming up later in the show. Good day. Tom Costello here for Hallie, and we begin with the newest battle over abortion access in the country. Mifepristone is the most commonly used abortion pill at the center of a court case that will likely land in the Supreme Court and could remove that pill from U.S. markets completely. A panel of 3 conservative appeals court judges in Louisiana heard oral arguments in the closely watched case that wrapped up just in the past 2 hours. The judges appeared to show support for opponents of the abortion pill and hit the lawyer trying to keep access open with some tough skepticism about the FDA's really decades-long approval of the pill. Take a listen.
I think FDA is charged with determining what is relevant for safety and efficacy, and it's certainly not up to lawyers and judges to come in and say, well,
if the FDA didn't consider an important part of the problem, it is our role, correct, to go behind the FDA and determine whether what they did was arbitrary and capricious.
Well, we've been talking a lot about the future access to this abortion pill. And recently, the Supreme Court, just last month, actually, blocked temporarily a lower court ruling that would have tightened up restrictions. Now, the pill has been approved since the year 2000 to provide abortions and manage miscarriages. So 22 years, almost 23, really. And now it's all but certain whatever these judges decide, whenever they decide, it will get appealed right up to the Supreme Court. All of this as lawmakers in South Carolina are debating a 6-week ban on most abortions, and they are expecting to pass that, making that state the latest to scale back abortion access in the country. NBC's Shaq Brewster monitoring all of the situation in South Carolina. But first, we start in the Washington Bureau with Yamiche Alcindor. And Yamiche, this appeals court is stacked with conservative, really Donald Trump appointees. Walk us through what we're hearing from some of them today. Where could this case go next?
Well, today, these were tense oral arguments before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals that lasted 2 hours. The testing exchanges happened between the 3 conservative judges, who you said were 2 of them were appointed by Donald Trump, 1 of them by George Bush, all of them Republican presidents. And each of these judges, they have a history of supporting restrictions on abortion. And they questioned and many times interrupted the lawyers for the Justice Department. An attorney for the DOJ started off the day by saying that a lower district court's order to pull the drug, mifepristone, off the market was, quote, unjustified and an unprecedented attack on scientific expertise. That order, we should remind folks, is not in place right now. But the judges today really took issue with that language. And one judge said to the DOJ lawyer, quote, do you think it's appropriate to attack the court? But the DOJ did not back down and argue that taking this abortion medication off the market and undoing approvals by the FDA would cause great harm to women. Meanwhile, lawyers for the group of anti-abortion advocates and lawyers who sued to get this pill off the market, they argued that the pill is unsafe and that the FDA should never have approved it when it did 23 years ago. Now, it's not clear when the appeals court might rule here because there's no deadline. But if you listen to those arguments, these judges, these conservative judges, they sounded like they were leaning toward the anti-abortion side. Tom?
And we should remind the audience, all of this comes after the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade. So what does this now mean for people trying to get access to the abortion pill right now?
Well, it's important that you ask that question because in the short term, access to the pill remains in place no matter what this appeals court decides because the Supreme Court issued a stay keeping access to the pill in place until it rules. Now, one of the sides of this case, whoever wins, whoever loses, they're going to appeal to the Supreme Court. It's pretty much a done deal that this is going to be back in the Supreme Court. At that time, the Supreme Court will decide whether to hear the case at that time or whether not to hear the case. The only way that this pill would be in jeopardy, though, Tom, is if the DOJ either loses in the Fifth Supreme Court and that the Supreme Court opts not to hear their appeal, or if the justices eventually take the case and rule in favor of the anti-abortion activists. Tom?
But to be clear, an abortion pill that's been on the market for 23 years is right now potentially in jeopardy. Yamiche, thank you very much. Let's bring in NBC Shaq Brewster. Shaq, lawmakers in South Carolina look like they're getting closer to passing a bill that would ban most abortions at 6 weeks. Other states have said 12. They say 6 now. Walk us through what this would do and what it could mean for access to abortion in the South and specifically South Carolina.
Well, you can be looking at a potential significant shift, especially in that southern region. Just look at this map that we created that just shows you the states that have restrictions on abortions before the point of viability. You see that it's pretty much South Carolina standing there alone. Right now, their law essentially has it at about 22 weeks. Well, they're currently debating a measure that would roll that back to 6 weeks, banning nearly all abortions at 6 weeks. They're saying at about 12 weeks, that's when you can have an abortion if there were those exceptions, the cases of rape or incest. This would be a dramatic shift. And, you know, Tom, normally we're talking about differences between Democrats and Republicans holding up legislation. Really, what's been the holdup in South Carolina is differences between Republicans. Republicans in the state House want a near total ban. They don't think 6 weeks is enough. The Senate rejected that and is saying 6 weeks is the measure that they want to go forward with. And then you have Democrats saying that all of this is politics and feeling outraged by the move. Listen to a little bit of what we heard from a Democratic lawmaker.
They have left them to die. I say it's time out with playing with the lives of South Carolinians and especially women in this state.
Now, it's not just the amount of weeks that are being restricted. You also have this law impacting minors. For example, a judge would be required to sign off on an abortion for minors. What's going on right now, and this is something that could pass any day at this point, but what you're watching right now on the State House floor is Democrats essentially flooding the zone with amendments, hundreds and hundreds of amendments that lawmakers have to vote on. I believe at last check they were at nearly 600 amendments that they had to cast a vote on. That is really slowing down the process. But despite the delays, if you listen to observers, even those who are opposed to this legislation, they're saying you can expect in a matter of days or weeks, South Carolina will join the ranks of new restrictions, and that restriction in that state will be about 6 weeks, Tom.
Shaq Brewster, right across the border in North Carolina. Thank you very much, Shaq. All right, we are now getting some mixed messages about whether an incident involving the paparazzi and Prince Harry and Meghan was really or wasn't serious. A spokesperson for the couple says that they were in a near catastrophic car chase, their words, in New York City. But law enforcement sources tell us it really wasn't a chase necessarily. It happened after an awards ceremony in Manhattan. You're seeing pictures from inside the Women of Vision Awards that Meghan and Harry attended last night. At about 9:50 p.m., 10 o'clock, two senior law enforcement sources tell us that Harry and Meghan left the Ziegfeld Ballroom where the event was being held. You see the couple leaving the event in this video. Police say what happened next really was a chaotic scene. A lot of paparazzi around the Duke and the Duchess of Sussex, apparently trying to follow them. If the chaos of this incident sounds familiar, it's because there are some parallels to what happened to Harry's mom, Princess Diana, who died. A high-speed car chase in Paris when she was being followed at high speeds by the paparazzi. No comment from Buckingham Palace or Kensington Palace on the matter. NBC's Ron Allen following it from New York City. Keir Simmons is outside of Buckingham Palace. We start with Ron. Ron, you're on the ground right there. A lot of differences in how serious this incident really seemed when you compare it to what police are saying, right? We've got the couple saying it was very serious. Police are hedging a little bit.
Exactly, Tom. And the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. The police are downplaying the suggestion that there was a potentially catastrophic incident in New York City involving Prince Harry and Meghan. There's, on their side, clearly they are angry and upset about what happened because they used very strong language in their statement describing what happened as near catastrophic, the chase, as highly aggressive paparazzi, as a relentless pursuit that they say went on for a couple of hours. Multiple near collisions, whereas the police say that the photographers made their transport challenging when they were leaving the Ziegfeld Theater here in Midtown and trying to get to a private residence a couple of miles away where they were staying. They say that there were no collisions, no summonses, no injuries, and no arrests. One person that we were able to talk to who was in the middle of this is a taxi driver. Yes, a taxi driver. Because somewhere after they left here, they went to a police precinct, and again, the Sussex car is being escorted by a NYPD vehicle. It seems like there's a two-vehicle convoy going through the city. They get to a police station precinct where apparently they're trying to get into a taxi to try and evade the paparazzi who are either chasing or following them. At that moment, here's what the taxi driver said when asked to describe how intense the situation was. Take a listen.
People just came out of nowhere with cameras and started snapping pictures. It was just like a strobe light show. I don't know what happened previous in the day, right? With me, it was chaotic, but not crazy.
Again, he says that he was with them for about 10 minutes or so. The taxi went back to the police precinct. They got out of the taxi and got into yet another vehicle, and they went home or to where they were staying safely without incident. But so again, we don't know where all this, the mayhem, the potential catastrophic chase that they described, where that happened along this route. At one point, they were on a busy highway that runs along the coast, the edge of New York City, perhaps there, but again, not a lot of details.
You have a timeline, right, of how this all happened. Can you spell that out for us a little bit here, the map of what they did?
Yeah, we do have a bit of a map. It starts at the Ziegfeld Theater here at about 10 o'clock, and they drive through the city, through city streets to the FDR Highway, which is a fast two-lane, 50-mile-per-hour highway. Apparently, they are in this drive for about an hour and 15 minutes, our law enforcement sources tell us, because they're trying to evade the paparazzi or lose them, if you will. The paparazzi apparently don't know where the Sussexes are staying in Manhattan, and that was the point of it. They were trying to get away so that no one could follow them to this residence. That's where at the precinct, they get to this precinct, they get into a taxi, they get back into another car, and it goes on from there. Bottom line, this was, of course, nothing like what happened to Princess Diana in Paris. I mean, that involved a driver who turned out to be drunk. The car was traveling at 65, 70 miles per hour when it crashed. That was a much different situation. But clearly, Harry, who has had a very difficult, contentious relationship with the paparazzi, was angry about this. He blames paparazzi for his mother's death. And so that's a big part of this as well in their description of what happened, perhaps. But again, something really triggered Harry for them to release this very angry statement. But the police are trying to downplay any suggestion that there was something going on here in New York City that was out of control.
Ron, thank you. Ron Allen in New York. Let's bring in Keir Simmons now, who's at Buckingham Palace. And Keir, Ron and I were both in London when Princess Diana died, and that had just a scarring influence on Harry, as you would expect. And I'm just wondering, the route seems strange. They seem to have backtracked up and down the East Side Highway there in New York City, as if they were trying to escape the paparazzi, right? And we should make the point, please. The news media in general is not the paparazzi. We have nothing to do with these people.
Yeah, sure. And the problem is, Tom, that's the same point that's being made since the death of Diana all those years ago. One of the ironies that will be pointed out by actually critics of Harry is that it's unlikely to have happened here in the UK, perhaps, because after the death of Diana, there was such a clampdown, there was such a reaction that you don't see that kind of thing here. So there are those who said, hold a second, why are you moving out of the UK where you're less likely to be pursued like this? I mean, I do think there will be questions about how it's possible. I mean, they got in a New York taxi, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. It seems incredible, and as in some kind of ad hoc way trying to escape the paparazzi. I mean, it's clearly not gone to plan, to say the very, very least. And I think there are some parallels. I think Ron's absolutely right. It's not the same. There are some parallels in the sense of that they were trying to escape the paparazzi just like Diana was, but also that they have private security now, not royal protection, just like Diana did. So there will be those talking points, if you like. Thank goodness it's just talking points. Nothing terrible happened. But there will also be those critics who will say that, as Ron pointed out, Harry is angry, that his reaction is likely to have been fueled by that anger, and that maybe that anger is colouring his judgment a little bit.
Well, yeah, but this has haunted him his entire life, what happened to his mom, and the paparazzi everywhere. So do you think that they might try to retreat from the public even more? They've got, a pretty large estate, if you will, or a big piece of property in Southern California.
Yeah. I don't think they're going to do that. Here's one of the great ironies of this, and we talk about Harry's battle with the media in the past. He's clearly determined to continue that battle into the future for as long as it takes for him, as he sees it, to win, even though there is those who question whether he can win. One of the ironies is that he's kind of in the public eye conducting this battle with the media who are filming him in the public eye and helping, it's like a vicious circle. And you can understand that, of course, he needs that publicity in order to continue this fight. He's going to be here in court in weeks to come, and he's already been in court already in this legal fight with the British press here over allegations that people's voicemails were listened to, including people around and even members of the royal family, including the King in Buckingham Palace there behind me. So, it's a one-man crusade, if you like, against the media. When you listen to what Prince Harry says multiple times in interviews in his book, he clearly believes that he can change the entire landscape, that he can really have an impact. But there are those, as I said, who question whether he can really do that.
Yeah. He's up against the First Amendment, I suspect. Keir, thank you very much. Keir Simmons in London. Now to Idaho, where a grand jury has indicted the man accused of fatally stabbing 4 University of Idaho students last year. Brian Kohberger is expected to be arraigned on murder charges and enter a plea during a court appearance on Monday. The 28-year-old criminology student is accused of stabbing and killing all 4 of those students last November at their house near campus. Kohberger was arrested at his family's home in Pennsylvania, you may recall, last December. He is suspected of 4 counts of first-degree murder and burglary. Now, the grand jury's indictment lets the state avoid a preliminary hearing. Neither prosecutors nor Kohberger's public defender could be immediately reached for comment. NBC's Steve Patterson following all of this. Steve, how does a grand jury indictment impact the proceedings? What's the legal strategy here for the DA?
Well, the impact all centers on what you just said. The preliminary hearing that was scheduled for June 26th, the one that was circled on everybody's calendar, has been essentially waived. So now everything that was just set to essentially play out in court over a week-long session, it will now play out behind closed doors. This is now the prosecution making the case to a jury and a judge, and that's it, that this should move to trial. So you're not going to see a lot of this strategy from the prosecution. You're not going to know what the defense would do in response. So the calculus may be in that strategic operation. If they have a witness that they want to put on the stand to test out, you're not going to know how they would respond in, let's say, a cross-examination. Another part of it is that those witnesses won't be up for cross-examination. These are people that are probably scarred. We know that at least 2 of the witnesses were actually other students inside that home that, pertain to have seen maybe a silhouette of the intruder as that was happening. They don't want to be in the media or in an open court giving that testimony, so that prevents them from doing that. There's also the calculation of the media. We're not going to be around. There's not going to be a massive news media, weeks of speculation just centering on this preliminary hearing, which would be the case had this played out in a different direction. So now you have Kohberger scheduled for a Monday hearing, an arraignment, where he will enter a plea. It's really the first big step towards a trial. Tom?
All right. Steve, thanks very much. Steve Patterson. So in the next hour or so, President Biden will be landing in Anchorage, Alaska, the first leg of a 5-day journey to Asia. It was really cut short, though, by the high-stakes talks to try and avert a global economic disaster. Here's what's on the schedule for the president at the G7. He will be meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister tomorrow in Hiroshima. Friday, he and other G7 leaders will visit the Hiroshima Memorial Museum, the site of the nuclear bombing during World War II. Saturday, he will talk about infrastructure, and we will hear from him Sunday in a press conference before he heads back here to D.C. That's where he will put his focus back on the debt ceiling. Before leaving today, the president sounded hopeful about the debt ceiling talks.
I'm confident that we'll get the agreement on the budget, that America will not default. We're going to come together because there's no alternative to do the right thing for the country.
NBC's Mike Memoli joins us now from Hiroshima, Japan. Mike, first of all, did you get breakfast? It's very early in the morning there. Second of all, this is a tightrope, right? The president's walking a tightrope here. He wants to stay close to the allies, but his mind is going to be on the talks back home here in D.C. So where do the talks stand at this hour?
Well, first, Tom, breakfast is next. As it relates to the itinerary and how it relates to the debt talks back home, it was clear that the first meeting President Biden had with the Big Four last week did not go well at all. Speaker McCarthy even accusing the president of lying about what Republicans had already passed in the House. It was obvious that yesterday's meeting went far better from both sides' perspective. And one of the reasons that even Speaker McCarthy was sounding more positive about the tenor of talks is because both sides have really delegated and empowered some of their top lieutenants to get further into the weeds on some of the most thorny differences between both sides. You have on the side of Speaker McCarthy, Congressman Garrett Graves, who's quietly emerged as one of his top allies in that rambunctious House caucus, and President Biden tasking some of the familiar names we've seen in a lot of congressional negotiations of late, Louisa Terrell, the director of the Office of Legislative Affairs, Steve Fischetti, who's one of his longest-serving top aides. But the real, I think, focus is on Shalanda Young, strong. She's the head of the Office of Management and Budget, a good person to have in budget negotiations. But more importantly, she has long relationships with Republicans in the House from her time, for her 10 years, in fact, as a staffer on the Appropriations Committee. So the hope is that she's going to be able to get into the weeds with the Republicans, make some headway that the president can be updated on while he's traveling overseas. And then when the president returns next Monday for what would likely be a third meeting with the Big Four, they can maybe get into the plan for what happens next. Can they present it to their caucuses? Because the time is ticking. We're just 15 days ahead of that deadline. The president's going to be overseas here for 5 of them. And so the time is ticking. And hopefully for both sides, they can make some progress here.
All right, let's talk about the G7. As you and I have discussed, the global economy is based in dollars. So this does have a ripple effect across the entire global economy and the G7. Ukraine, likely to be a big focus, but talking war in a city like Hiroshima, the very name evokes war, that will be poignant. But also China, both in its economic expansion and the threats to Taiwan, and the president floating this idea that he may want to talk to China's Xi Jinping sometime soon, right?
Yeah, that's right, Tom. I mean, you look at Biden's whole foreign policy, it's been premised on the idea that democracies, in Biden's view, can deliver in a way that the autocracies, Russia and China, he argues, cannot. And you see on this trip that whole premise being challenged. The president wants to show American leadership, especially here in China's backyard. He was supposed to meet with the leaders of the Quad, an alliance of Indo-Pacific countries that is premised on pushing China as they have tried to exert their influence in the region. And you also have that visit to Papua New Guinea that the president had to cancel. That was also a big display of force by the U.S., at least it was supposed to be. And so the president was asked today if China is actually winning in this equation, and maybe even whether the president will have a chance to talk with President Xi Jinping. Monica Alba actually asked the president that earlier today. Let's listen.
With President Xi soon, sir?
That's my whether soon or not, we will be meeting.
So there has been a lot of ramp up of high-level conversations between U.S. officials and their Chinese counterparts. Not that leader-to-leader conversation just yet. And the White House is saying still some time before we potentially see that meeting later this year, if it happens.
Mike Memoli in Japan hasn't slept yet. So, Mike, breakfast and then a nap. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. All right. The ongoing culture war on book bans in Florida is at the center of a new lawsuit against a school district in Florida. Penguin, Random House, authors, Florida parents, and an advocacy group are all getting in on this suit after the Escambia County School District and its school board banned 10 books related to race and the LGBTQ community. The lawsuit argues that removing books on these topics is part of a clear agenda. Since late May, the district and the board have removed or indefinitely restricted access to 5 books by the author plaintiffs, the ones you see here on the screen. They include Uncle Bobby's Wedding, Two Boys Kissing, and others. NBC's Antonia Hilton joins me now. Antonia, the lawsuit cites the First and the 14th Amendments here, right? So talk us through how this plays out.
That's right, Tom. It's focused on free speech and the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. And they're arguing that they're alleging that this district removed these books that are disproportionately about people of color and LGBTQ children and their lives and their families, that they removed them and in some cases didn't even follow their own district policies about how to review them and how to do them, or that they overrode recommendations made by community members who were on committees and looked at these books closely. Their hope is that this district will put these books back onto shelves and that other districts in Florida that have been engaged in something similar will do the same. 2 of the families that have been included in this suit, they've argued that their kids, who are students right now in the district, deserve access to materials that are diverse, that include multiple types of families, storylines, kids of all backgrounds, and that public schools have an obligation to provide that kind of diversity of material. Take a listen to an interview with George M. Johnson, one of the authors of one of the most banned books in this lawsuit.
When you have a book that is telling a first-hand account of what it is like to grow up in this country being Black and queer and giving representation to a community that rarely gets to see themselves seen in books, seen on television, it creates an empowerment for those students.
This is a big deal here. This lawsuit, of course, is directed at this one school district, but it will have implications because this is part of a broader movement we're seeing in school districts around the country right now, from California to Colorado to Florida. And the authors here have partnered with Penguin Random House, the largest publisher here, and they're bringing in children's voices and their families' voices into this, too. And so it's going to be interesting to see, you know, in Florida, which has become a hotbed of this culture war, you know, what kinds of changes may come now.
So Florida really is, it seems right now, ground zero for the culture war. And there's a broader context here beyond Florida's political landscape, how this is kind of spreading and becoming a hot political issue nationwide.
That's right. DeSantis has made this a major part of his platform. We're waiting to see, you know, when and if he'll be announcing his run for president. But all indications are that these issues around books, race, gender, and sexuality, or what he calls, you know, these woke issues, that they're going to animate his campaign and his remaining leadership in the state of Florida. You know, in fact, just on Monday, he signed a new bill into law that is going to keep public colleges and universities from being able to fund diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, and will limit the ways in which race and issues related to discrimination can be taught in those public colleges. And so, you know, we're seeing these changes happen, not just in public schools, not just among children, among, you know, for whom there's long been debate about what kinds of materials are appropriate for them, but also at the college and university level, Tom.
All right, Antonia, thank you very much. Antonia Hilton. Some breaking news we have just now. Montana's governor just signed the country's first law completely banning TikTok. It goes further than any other state's moves to ban that social media app. The ban is expected to face some legal challenges, potentially determining the fate of the app in the country. Now, in a statement, TikTok says the governor signed a bill that is, quote, infringing on First Amendment rights by unlawfully banning TikTok. It goes on to say people in Montana can continue to use the app to express themselves. We want to bring in NBC legal analyst Danny Savallo. Danny, what are the ins and the outs, I should say, of this ban? How can people still use this app in Montana if it's banned?
Well, apparently it doesn't criminalize actual users' conduct. It criminalizes the sale. So it targets the app sellers. That might be the App Store, or that might be TikTok itself. And that would make sense from Montana's perspective. Far better to go after a deep pocket like TikTok than go after individual users who are probably 18, 19 years old, and who knows if they have any assets or whether they're worth prosecuting. So probably a smart strategy if that's what the ban does, but it leaves itself open to a number of different challenges. Most notably the First Amendment and something called the Dormant Commerce Clause. Basically, an individual state can't unnecessarily or unduly burden interstate commerce. But what exactly that means is a little hazy, and it's moved a lot over the years. Even in the last decade or so, it's been redefined. And then perhaps most importantly is that traditionally the Commerce Clause dealt with things like widgets, tangible items that are sold in a particular state. It's a totally different thing with this modern use of the internet and apps like this, because where is it sold? Where is it used? Where is the application? Where is the jurisdiction for this application? A lot of complicated issues. So you can expect there will be challenges, and soon.
Yeah, a reminder, the government is concerned that anything you do on TikTok might be fed to Chinese intelligence and the Chinese military. But if you live in Montana, under this application of the law, the governor can tell you what you can and can't have on your phone, even if you put it on your phone in a different state. How in the world are they ever going to enforce this?
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, you raised the issue. When we live in a global community, sorry, I'm using my phone. There I am, I'm back. When we live in a global community like this, the internet asks a difficult question: where is some kind of conduct actually happening? If you're looking at your phone, but you downloaded it in Montana, but you're looking at it, say, in California, is the conduct happening, or did it happen in Montana? So those are all thorny issues that we all have to deal with in the modern internet age. And this law that seeks to criminalize this kind of conduct or punish it is going to be subjected to a number of different challenges, one of which is going to be jurisdictional and where does the conduct actually happen?
And who would ever police this? It seems awfully challenging and difficult. Danny, thank you very much. Coming up, we have more breaking news coming in. The House just voted to send a resolution to expel Representative George Santos. That suggestion going to the Ethics Committee. What this means for the push to get him out. Plus, disgraced Theranos CEO Elizabeth Holmes just lost her last-minute bid to avoid prison when she has to start her 11-year sentence coming up. And new details tonight about how Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is further restricting LGBTQ rights in that state. That is coming up in our 5 Things. All right, let's get you over now to the 5 things our team thinks that you and I should know about tonight. Number 1, let's go to Florida. Governor Ron DeSantis signed 4 bills yesterday restricting LGBTQ rights. They include a ban on transition-related care for minors, as well as an expansion of what critics call the state's Don't Say Gay law. He also signed a bill that would bar trans people from using bathrooms that align with their gender identities, and another that will restrict so-called adult preferences in front of make their performances in front of minors. He said the latter measure was intended to limit drag performances. Number 2, Elizabeth Holmes has a date to go to prison now. She'll start her 11-year sentence for her now infamous blood testing scam on May 30th. That's after a court last night rejected her attempt to remain free while she tries to overturn her conviction. Also last night, she was ordered to pay more than $450 million to people affected by her crimes. Number 3, Ford is recalling more than 310,000 trucks because the driver's front airbag may not inflate in a crash. The car maker says it's due to dust collecting inside the steering wheel, interrupting the electrical connection. Owners can get the steering wheel wiring replaced for free at Ford dealerships. Number 4, big-time soccer player Folorin Malumgin has picked the U.S. men's soccer team over England's. He's a 21-year-old born in Brooklyn, grew up in London. He's been playing for England his whole career, and now FIFA has approved his request to switch to the U.S. national team. He cannot change it back. The next World Cup is in 3 years. He could be key if the U.S. wants to actually have a chance for a top scorer. All right, number 5, the latest advancement in condiment technology is here. It's Kraft Heinz unveiling the new Heinz Remix Sauce dispenser. The futuristic digital machine can mix up any combo of 4 base sauces: ketchup, 57 ranch. We've also got barbecue, along with what it calls the enhancers, jalapeno flavor, smoky chipotle. We're getting hungry here in the studio. Buffalo and mango. And like I said, I'm hoping that my wife's mayonnaise, she's Belgian, she loves mayonnaise on fries. Maybe we can mix it all together. We should try it. All right, some breaking news here in D.C. The House is a step closer to potentially kicking out embattled Republican Congressman George Santos. You see the moment right there on Capitol Hill when the House voted 221 to 204 to move this bill to kick Santos out of Congress to the House Ethics Committee. The vote was mostly along party lines. Now, remember, Santos faces 13 federal charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, and stealing public funds. He faces decades in prison if convicted. Right now, the Long Island Republican is pleading not guilty. NBC's Hallie Vitale joins me now to talk about it. All right, Hallie, walk us through what happens now with this resolution. It goes to the Ethics Committee. How long could this whole thing take?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, this is the slow way to kick someone out of Congress, because there was a move to try to expel Santos from Congress just on its face. But that kind of a move requires a 2/3 majority. And several of the Republicans even that voted to refer Santos to the Ethics Committee said, hey, we would have voted to expel him outright, but I know we didn't have the 2/3 majority, so this is what we need to do to ultimately get him out. Now, I think the picture that you're seeing on the other side of the screen next to me is Santos talking just in the last minute or so about the fact that he feels that he still has the right to defend himself, that he didn't talk to Speaker McCarthy before this, but that he also voted to refer himself to the Ethics Committee as he continues to fight these charges in the courts. You've seen him before. We'll see it again. He is routinely defiant of all of the charges against him. He seems to be saying that he's not going anywhere, and clearly he's not going anywhere fast. Partly why we're seeing them take this method, Tom, is because while Republicans know that this is a dam that continues to have water mounting behind it, they still need Santos's vote. When you look at all of these Republicans from New York, but especially the one who's embattled now, they're all the majority makers. McCarthy already has such slim margins here. He can't really afford to lose a Republican. So by voting to put Santos to the Ethics Committee, it at least begins the process of kicking him out, sort of quelling the people who want him to leave Congress, while also still letting him still be an active voting part of the Republican conference, which McCarthy badly needs right now.
Yes, but correct me if I'm wrong, he's not on any committees, right? So he's only used for a floor vote. Is that right?
Correct. But frankly, that's kind of all McCarthy needs, right? Look at the way that he was able to push through things like the debt, which have earned him major leverage now in these negotiations with the White House over the debt ceiling. But we've also seen Santos be integral in passing things like the recent border package the Republicans put forward and other top priorities. So again, numbers matter. McCarthy is clearly playing a numbers game. And for now, he'd like the numbers to stay as similar to what they are as possible.
You're the best on the beat, among the best. All of you guys are the best.
Thanks,
all you NBC guys are the best on the beat.
I won't tell
thank
anyone,
you very much. All right, Hallie Vitale. When we come back, if you've been to the grocery store, you probably noticed egg prices are finally dropping. What happened? How long could it last? We've got more on that, breaking it down, coming up. Well, guess what? A Nepali Sherpa just broke his own record on Mount Everest. We'll tell you how later in the Global. But first, check your grocery bill. Have you noticed the price of eggs? It may not be sticker shock that you're feeling anymore. It might be relief, because right now, the price of a dozen eggs on the wholesale market, wholesale, is down to its lowest level in nearly 2 years. Take a look now at the chart. You see wholesale prices hovering about $1 to start January of last year. Then it shoots way up to more than $4.50 6 months ago. Now, 50 cents on the wholesale level. And that, of course, means that we are paying less. Here's NBC's Brian Chung to break it down.
After an eye-popping rise in egg prices earlier in the year, Humpty Dumpty is now having a great fall. The average nationwide retail price for a dozen eggs now at $3.27. That's down from an all-time peak of $4.82 back in January. Why? Supply and demand now tilting in the favor of consumers.
Part of the reason why we got to such high prices had to do with high-path avian influenza.
That's right, the deadly bird flu, now starting to get under control. Sick birds led to low supply in December, the time of year when demand for eggs is highest. In the winter, the U.S. had about 308 million hens laying eggs, 20 million less than a year before. Cal-Maine Foods, the country's largest egg producer, commanding 20% of the retail egg market, sharply raised prices. Its profits grew more than 700% in the last quarter. Those profits ruffled feathers on Capitol Hill, with Democrats like Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congresswoman Katie Porter accusing them of price gouging. Cal-Maine's response, it does not directly set retail egg prices. But the worst of the bird flu appears to be over. The hen population is growing again, moving back up to 314 million in March. So supplies back in order. All while demand wanes.
We're almost a week after Mother's Day, moving into Memorial Day, which, then comes into your grilling season.
With the holidays over and school about to break, the peak time for baking and eating breakfast at home is fading, which could all lead to deals at the grocery store.
My guess is see it another several percentage points down, maybe closer to $2.99 or $2.75 situation, depending on what kind of promotions we see throughout the retail channels.
All right, Brian Chung is joining us now. High source of protein and prices are coming down. That's kind of welcome news now. Is this likely to be a sign of things to come for other food staples, or are eggs unique?
Yeah, well, you heard from Amy Smith. We also asked her that same question, and she said eggs aren't necessarily a bellwether of other types of food prices across the board. So even though we saw some positive signs on the prices of eggs, it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to see commensurate declines in other categories as well. However, recent data that we got from the Consumer Price Index did show that the prices of food at home declining between March and April, albeit only by a little bit, but we'll take anything that we can get. At least for right now, the protein that we're getting from those eggs could be a sign for other inputs getting cheaper as well, like, for example, Tom, mayonnaise, right? So at least there's that.
There is that. You had so many pun opportunities there, and You know, you kind of let him die just at the very end. Okay, all right. Brian, thank you, Brian Chung. Coming up, something you've never seen before. We've got a brand new look at the Titanic. The images here are just startling at what it reveals about how the ship sank. Plus, Formula One is calling off a big race because of devastating floods. That's later in the Global. Okay, if your head is turned, look at the screen. We have brand new images of the Titanic that are showing us the ship's wreckage like we have never seen before, thanks to deep sea mapping. Researchers now have the first full-sized digital scan of that doomed ship 2.5 miles under the Atlantic Ocean. Look at that. Remarkable images. You'll see here the bow of the ship, that's the front of the ship, and as the anchor and the scan swoops around, they've located where the grand staircase was, made famous in the Hollywood blockbuster. And researchers found the stern of the ship and the radio room. And the pictures look as if the water has just been kind of drained away. Investigators say these images, 700,000 of them, will help them and us understand how the ship really did sink. Take a listen.
You can literally move around this vast wreck and find any detail that you want to. And that'll allow us eventually to understand how the wreck fell apart when it sank, because we can literally take parts of the models and put them back together again.
Yeah, kind of a virtual reality. NBC's Josh Letterman is in London for us. Josh, I thought we knew how the Titanic sank, but apparently we don't know everything, right?
That's right, Tom. And the big mystery about the Titanic has always been, how did this ship that was said to be unsinkable actually sink? And while the predominant theory for many decades has been that it hit that iceberg on the starboard side, essentially the right side of the ship, there hasn't always been a consensus about that. In fact, there was an early theory that it may have actually hit a submerged part of the iceberg on basically the bottom of the ship. And so now researchers hope this new data, this new first of its kind, a digital twin of the ship, will allow them to learn much more, not only about what happened when it hit that iceberg, but how it actually broke apart as it fell to the bottom of the ocean floor.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time looking at these images today because they're fascinating and they're important because they really help preserve the scene of this horrific tragedy that claimed 1,500 lives. But the wreckage itself is rusting away. It's not going to be there forever, right?
That's exactly right, Tom. As you know from your reporting, it sits 2.5 miles at the bottom of the ocean. It's very dark down there. And while there's not a whole lot of fish that deep down in the ocean, there is bacteria, which is eating away at the wreckage from that ship. There is all kinds of deterioration from the water around it. And so this is really a race against the clock to be able to document the remains of the ship before it further deteriorates. And that's why scientists and researchers are so excited about the opportunity to study these unprecedented images, really the first full digital copy of this ship where you can see what each little piece looked like. Those shoes on the bottom of the ocean floor, that really got to me. The remainder of some of those 1,500 victims who died in that unopened champagne bottles, part of the debris field, which will help scientists learn exactly what happened on that tragic day, Tom.
Importantly, I did ask the question, and there are no human remains, but we are looking at the remains, of course, of their bottles of champagne, as you said, shoes and brooches and jewelry. It's very poignant. Josh, thank you. Josh Letterman reporting from London for us. And, of course, NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day. You know, you can't possibly watch, read, or listen to everything, so our foreign desk has highlighted some for you and for me. Here's what they're watching in their area. It's called The Global. In Sudan, fighting between the Sudanese military and a paramilitary group heating up in the capital city of Khartoum. The army has begun using airstrikes and shelling residential areas in that city where the paramilitary group is apparently holding up. Around 1 million people have already been displaced by fighting there, and about half of the country's population needs aid, according to the UN. In Italy, at least 9 people are dead after torrential rains and flooding battered the northern part of the country. The government estimates that some areas got half of their annual total rainfall average in just 36 hours. And this weekend's Emilia-Romagna Formula One Grand Prix was just canceled out of safety concerns. In Nepal, a Sherpa just climbed Mount Everest for the 27th time, beating the previous record, which he already held. He is 53 years old. He first scaled the world's highest peak in 1994 and has climbed it almost every year since. It includes 2019, when he climbed to the summit twice in 1 week. Still to come, Netflix is a mega player when it comes to streaming, but streaming with ads, not so much. How much is hanging on their big pitch to advertisers today after the break? Chances are you subscribe to Netflix, right? Well, the world's largest streaming service is getting into the fight for ad dollars now. In its first ever upfront presentation today, Netflix reportedly said 25% of all new signups choose their ad-supported tier. It's looking to expand that, with the Wall Street Journal tweeting that co-CEO Greg Peters kicked off the show today by saying, "We are new to the ads business, and that's why we want to work with you to build something bigger and better than what exists today." Netflix has the biggest subscriber base of all the streaming platforms out there, but it reportedly has one of the smallest pools of customers who pay for their ad version. Investopia editor-in-chief Caleb Silver joins me now. I'm just curious, and sorry for not knowing this off the top of my head, but I have Netflix like everybody out there. How much cheaper is it if I choose the ad base? Do you know?
Yeah, it's $6.99, depending on what you're paying and the type of membership you have. It's probably a lot cheaper. Most people are paying in that $15 to $17 range. And Netflix trying to add more paid subscribers to the ad-supported product. The company's saying today there are about 5 million active global users who are using it, not exactly saying how many subscribers. There are estimates of around 1 million or a little bit more. But keep this in mind, Tom. Netflix wants that number to be close to 40 million by the third quarter of this year. That's what their prediction was back in September. So it's moving a little bit slower, and they're only 6 months into this, but it's very competitive, and there are a lot of options out there.
But it's kind of interesting if it's literally going to cost me $6, $7 to go with the ad-supported version versus $15 or so. Is the problem that you know it's not more expensive on the high end? In other words, if it's $25, then you might say, oh yeah, $6 is a heck of a lot better. But if it's only a matter of $10 or so, you might say, I don't mind $10 to avoid the ads.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, though, Tom, is trying to attract new subscribers to the platform. It is the biggest one out there. It's got 225 million global subscribers, about 74 million just in North America alone. But the battle now is for advertising and for targeted advertising. And to wit, Netflix announcing today, again, it has that 5 million global active users. The average age is around 34 years old for these new subscribers to the ad platform. There's new sponsorships ads. You can now, if you're a sponsor a launch of a show. You can sponsor something seasonal. You can buy the top 10 shows in the top 10 countries, have it your way. So Netflix trying to make it more amenable to potential advertisers and drum this business up. Adding subscribers is very challenging for streamers these days. How many more can they add, and where are those coming from? This is one avenue that Netflix is trying to take. It's just taken a long time.
All right, so is this really focused on the U.S. model, or is it the global audience base? Because everybody I know has Netflix, including family in Europe. I mean, it seems like everybody has Netflix. How do you grow that base?
Yeah, the growth is really going to have to come from both outside the U.S. and within. Again, it has 74 million subscribers here in the U.S. and Canada, 225 million worldwide. Now, there's a lot of people out there when you think about how many iPhones are in the pockets out there, over 1 billion or so. So there is potentially room, but there are competitive products right now. And, you know, consumers are choosing which one they want to go with, depending on how much they offer and the programming that they offer, most importantly, Tom.
All right, Caleb, thank you very much. Caleb Silver. That is a wrap for us at this hour, and we will have more as the news continues with Top Story right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.